Good morning. Now, away from matters water and sanitation, we're going to be engaging quite eloquent persons on this side of the studio talking about infrastructural investments and their correlation to housing and urban planning. I'm joined by none other than George Mburu, is the CEO of Mizizi Homes Africa. Karibu sana. And on the far end is none other than Mr. Sylvester Kasuku, who is the government's advisor in matters infrastructure, and more so, he is the immediate former CEO of the LoveSet project. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
So, gentlemen, before we start speaking matters of infrastructure as well as housing and planning, what are your expectations this afternoon when the president is going to be giving his last address, State of the Nation address, the 8th, so to speak? You know, we have seen this over the years. This is a platform he uses to tell us where we are as a country. Let's start off with you, Bwana Mburu.
Sure.
What are your expectations?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And first of all, the most important thing that everybody expects is that the president is going to touch on how we are going to get out of the turmoil that we have been because of the corona pandemic. Corona pandemic came and so many businesses, so many jobs, everything, the economy was hit hard. And now, since at least there is some hope, because they have, he recently removed the curfews and the restrictions that were there. Now we want to know what are the way forward. How is the government going to assist the businesses, as well as assist the employed people, and also itself, the government. What is it going to do to make sure that the economy is back to normal? Because we need an enabling environment, and especially at this time that we are also heading to the election. There is we are coming from a downward economy, and now we are at a point whereby we need to come together and hold hands. We need now the government and the president being the head to come out very clearly on the way forward, because for sure, if we do not hold hands, if we do not have a strategy coming from a corona, and there is also a strain that is also reported to be coming, we need to know what is the way forward. And him being the head, we expect him to give us the way forward, and I believe he's going to do that. He's up to task so that our economy can grow. And we had plans before corona. We had the Vision 2030. We had the Big Four agendas, which for sure we have not attained because of one or two things. And but we still need to continue moving, because the country is growing, people are being born. We need to continue living and growing. And for sure, as Kenyans, we have hope, because peace, we have had peace, and peace is the most important thing. And that cohesion and living together, I think that is something we expect from the president. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I hear economic recovery. I hear plans a government has when it comes in light of this development of a new strain. Still, our vaccination numbers have not gotten to what government has. We have been given a deadline to have Kenyans at least 10 million, so to speak, by December 21st on LAC services. That is what your expectations are, sure, as well as impetus to manufacturers.
Sure.
Watu wa biashara.
Sure.
As a government advisor, and as far as matters of infrastructure are concerned, Kasuku, what are your expectations ahead of this address?
Thank you very much. Number one, there are certain existing scenarios with regard to how the economy is currently positioned. Number one, there were previous plans of how to upscale, the development, particularly for the MSMEs. There was a previous promise by 2017 of some 10,000 enterprises to be energized and to upscale to the next level, and that was also to give a shot in the arm to the manufacturing sector. We know that there is a downtrend, particularly in the manufacturing sector, where actually we are shrinking in numbers, coming down all the way from over 9% to 7.6%. And in the face of the world today, where economies are fast moving towards upscaling their manufacturing so that they can take advantage of technology, that is a worrying scenario. We've got the issue of very high cost of power. And you've seen His Excellency the President trying to address it using many, scenarios. We've seen that we have a lot of thermal power, irrespective of government in investment, particularly in cheaper power, geothermal, wind, solar, name it. And we are caught in a situation of take or pay. With regard to the existing thermal power generators. And that actually affects us, particularly when we are talking about external shocks that come with the cost of oil, among many others. We have a situation of a large pool of unemployed youth, and this really does create the current disaffection that you see among the young people, a sense of hopelessness, a sense of a sense of giving up, a sense of getting even into a situation of losing the moral value of what we used to really covet, reaching to a point whereby we have a large number of unemployed youth who are energetic with the technology in their hands. You see a lot of complaints. So we have so many things to address. However, all this being the case, we have a lot of good things on the other side, because the situation now is like a coin. It has both a head and a tail, yes. There is a lot of investments in infrastructure. Just right next to your studio here,
we can see
you can see and the skyline of Nairobi changing, particularly with the expressway. Though it has come late, it was supposed to have been done by the year 2012, but the financing structure changed, and it therefore needed to be done differently, and currently it's now being done. We've seen Lamu Port has now been, the first 3 berths are ready, now operational, and needs to be jacked up. We've seen new plans, particularly special economic zones. If you look at Dongokundu, rearing up with the Dongokundu link road that crosses the sea. We've seen the opening of borders, particularly with Ethiopia, so that actually we are having a rejuvenated regional economy in which, by connecting to Ethiopia, we have actually created a new regional economy with regard to the 110 million people on the other side, the close to 50 million on this side that have not been working with the cross-border facilitation. Now, there are new opportunities that are arising. We've also seen that climate change issues are becoming quite something that needs to be dealt with. And actually, economic resilience needs to kick in. And we've seen many strategies being brought up in different parts of the globe that we as Kenyans cannot really ignore. And we have to be part of it. Mm-hmm. So there are there's a huge basket.
From where here.
Yes.
Looking at our hits and misses, so to speak, that's what you're saying, being in government at this point. Now let's take up that conversation about, infrastructural investments vis-a-vis housing and planning. So let's start off from a regional aspect, so to speak. The regional instability that we're currently seeing, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, being the immediate former CEO of the last said project, and also other projects within the region. How does this augur into these projects when you're talking about cross-border facilitation?
What I would like to say is that regional integration is actually currently a global drive. Even if you talk about the SDGs, there is the call for integration. If you talk about the AU Agenda 2063, there is the call for integration. If you talk about the African Development Bank and other key institutions of the globe, they are all talking about regional integration. The conflicts are here with us, and we can never rule them out all the time. You saw how conflict affected many countries, including Rwanda. Uganda was at one time having the same scenario. Somali is persisting. And Ethiopia was at it at one time, and again, it is once again back here. Sudan, the previous Sudan, and the current Sudan, and the South Sudan, all these are with us. What I would like to say is that we have to keep our eyes on the ball. we've got to keep our eyes on the ball, in that even if these conflicts occur or they continue to recur, we still need to pursue the issue of regional integration. What we need to do is that we need to find out settlement mechanisms, because conflicts are not a preserve of any specific society or any specific country, but they are usually caused by a number of issues, particularly when citizens maybe might not be very well satisfied, or even when people are struggling for power, or when situations are even influenced from outside jurisdictions where those kind of conflicts occur. In my view, the issue of timelines, like the 2063 agenda of AU, among them is silencing the guns and championing regional integration. We need to ensure that as we go along, we continue to lessen issues of conflicts. And we need to develop the infrastructure that enable the continent to actually achieve greater integration. And what you need to know is that when countries are affected by issues of inaccessibility and somehow not having a lot of integration with others, they usually also tend to cause a lot of tension within the populace, because opportunities are fewer, and people cannot exploit potentials that they could have done if there was greater integration and greater understanding across borders.
Now, when we come back, we're going to be putting into perspective within the local setup, and this is a country, where do we stand in as far as infrastructural projects are concerned, and what turnover effect does it have, especially on urban planning, where one of our guests here, Judge Mburu, there is going to be telling us about infrastructure vis-a-vis housing and urban planning, so to speak. So do not go away. We'll be right back. Good morning. If you're tuning in, you're still watching KBC Channel 1, and we're talking about matters infrastructure as well as housing and planning investments. Joining me in studio, with me in studio, is none other than the CEO of Mizizi Africa Homes. That is Dr. George Mburu. Karibu sana. And far right is none other than the former immediate CEO of the LAPSET project and currently the advisor on matters infrastructure, Sylvester Kasuku. So before we took a short break, we're looking at regional integration and talking about the current instability, cases of pockets. I would say pockets, and I'm saying that with a pinch of salt. And you said that we need to keep our eyes on the ball. Regional integration is key, especially cross-border facilities. Now let's come back home. Financing these infrastructural projects, we have seen critics who have come and said that we are not so sure that some of these projects are going to see the light of day. One, we are transiting. We are going to be having a different government in place after August 9th. Should we be worried, Mr. Kasuku? Let's pick it from there.
Number one, change of power or change of regime should never be a cause of worry in a mature democracy. And what I can say is that in many developed countries, change of regime does not mean change of policy, or does not mean development starts to suffer. And in a situation where that becomes the issue, then that should worry us. If change of regime or change of leadership can lead to disruption of development. And that is part of also requiring ourselves to keep our eyes on the ball. That we should be a country that is consistent, a country that is predictable with regard to our stability, and a country of mature democracy. Now, moving forward, issues of financing infrastructure has never been a walk in the park for many countries. And even if you look at countries like America, even if you look at China, you look at many countries in Europe, there was a real time of tightening of belts, particularly if requisite infrastructure. And what I mean by requisite is that is much needed infrastructure has to be built. then you have to find ways of financing.
So there's no way out.
We've also seen how countries like India, we've also seen how countries like Brazil have equally tackled issues of investing in infrastructure. So as we speak in Africa now, for us to start to, scale the heights of the skyscrapers that we are thinking about in terms of development, we need to make certain critical investments in the continent. And the AU estimates that by the year 2040, between the year 2012 and the year 2040, we needed to have made an investment of close to $360 billion on infrastructure. That is over 32,000 kilometers of new roads, over 30,000 kilometers of new railway, over 1.3 billion ton added capacity to African ports, among many others. So if we really have to finance this, then we have to brace, the real pressure that comes with this. And I know people have been complaining about loans. People have been complaining about, difficulties with the issue of budget.
Let's, before even we tackle that loans,
yes.
Kenyans are already, so to speak, feeling the heat. We have seen mega projects. Now we are using the superhighway, the Madaraka Express. We are having the expressway here that is still under construction. But government is operating on a deficit that has to be plugged by external financing as well as domestic. And Kenyans are crying foul and say, are this priority? Before you answer that question, let me rope in Mr. Mburu. Talking about priority, government has also prioritized the issue of affordable housing.
Sure.
From where you sit, what is the main challenge? 2022 is just but around the corner.
Yeah.
What has been the main challenge of actually achieving this?
Yeah, thank you very much. And affordable housing is one of the big four agendas by the government, as we know. And it is a very critical part of the government's agenda because it has so much ripple effect than only people being housed. Because when you are talking about housing, you are also talking about manufacturing. Because when you come to building a house, you need to use cement, you need to use concrete, and that is part of manufacturing. And manufacturing is also part of the big four agendas. Another thing that the government is trying so hard is to create job employments, because we have noted that our biggest challenge as a country is a youthful, a young nation that has such healthy people who are jobless. So you find that issues of insecurity come in place, and these people, if they are well utilized because they have the will and they work, we can be able to make use of our natural resources, what we have, and actually be able to bring our country out of the third world country that we currently are measured. And housing also, when you are talking about housing, there is also the issue of infrastructure, which has very well been touched here. And because when you want to construct somewhere, you must have that accessibility. And accessibility can only come when there is construction of roads, railways, and so forth and such. So
basically, infrastructural projects actually augur well, or there's a correlation between matters of planning. Now, as we correct your sound, let me rope in Mr. Kasuku. We handled, or rather, we left it up at the issue of, are these infrastructural projects priority? Because when you look at it, the high cost of living, we are dealing with COVID-19 and such. A majority would say these infrastructural projects, please, not now, later. From where you sit?
Number one, I would like to state that some of what we can call a discomfort, or what you can call the impatience in the economy, in which people are asking whether these are priorities, is actually, I would call it an illusionary impatience. We need this infrastructure. They are great priorities. I want to state it that if Kenya did not construct Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to the standard of what it is today in the 1970s, we could not be really counting ourselves as a good competitor in the region and in the continent, and being a hub. We've been claiming, we've claimed the title of being a regional hub. when we talk about key infrastructure investments that serve the region, not just Kenya alone. You talk about the port, you talk about the airport, you talk about the highways, corridors, you know, and these investments therefore have to be done. If we don't do them now, they'll be much, much costlier in the future. And even investments that we are undertaking today that ought to have been built before, they were much cheaper before. And when you hear some people saying that, you know, if the SGR was built, let's say by the year 2012, it was supposed to be cheaper. When you build it later, it gets costlier. When the expressway was supposed to have been built by the year 2012, you build it now, the investor, you know, uses more resources beyond, because costs change, cost of materials change, cost of labor changes, and many other transactions that go with the development of infrastructure also change. So
changing
what I would
times,
like to say,
changing costs.
Changing times, changing costs, and you know, everything changes. And what I want to say is that the current global challenges that we are facing, like the COVID and the like, are not the only challenges that we will ever face in this economy. There'll be more to come. So one particular challenge should not make us to feel like we should now crumble. We should now stop everything. And we should now just go on our knees and say, let's just eat, or let's just get something to eat, and then the economy will recover. The economy cannot recover with food on the table alone, but it requires the backbone, it requires the structure, it requires the muscles, it requires the bones, like a human body, for it to perform.
And that is infrastructure.
And that is infrastructure.
Okay.
If you don't have infrastructure, I can assure you, you'll cry more. When you hear farmers cannot be able to get their goods, their farm produce to the market, when you hear that raw materials from farms cannot reach factories, when you hear that produced goods cannot reach consumers, then you know it is infrastructure that is lacking. Infrastructure is the bone.
Let's talk about investment. Let's rope you in. He's speaking about the challenges that from where you sit within the value chain, you go through. Yeah. One of the issues is land acquisition. Sure. What is your take on that, Mburu?
Yeah, thank you very much. And for sure, land matters are very pertinent to many people's heart. And actually, it is something that even when we are talking of the infrastructure, is something we as people have made it actually almost impossible for the infrastructure to be there, because you hear a road is passing by and people want to be compensated, and the land price go high, so very high. Then you find a road has been constructed, and a land that was very cheap because there was no infrastructure, all of a sudden has skyrocketed in price and becomes unaffordable. And these are some of the things that are also, we have our development partners who are willing to assist, and the government is also, I believe, has the willpower, and there's that environment. But we as a people, we also need to change, to stop looking at shortcuts. You want to get easy money. You had a piece of land that had this value. Once a bypass is passed by the government there, all of a sudden the land becomes untouchable. So you find that, for example, if it's a developer like as Mizizi Africa Homes Limited, you are looking at that land maybe to come and do affordable housing for people, and maybe we had an idea that there is a bypass that is going to pass there, so we feel this is a good place to develop. But now once the road has passed by, you find that now the cost of land becomes untouchable, and by extension you find it becomes impossible for us, like as a developer, to come up with that affordable house. So what happens? The cost is passed on to the consumer. Yeah.
So from the private sector point of view, then, are we having conversations, especially where in real estate is concerned, private sector engagement with government, so that prior investments, where they're going and how then this will affect, because we already know there are those people who prospect, expecting that these projects are coming this way. Stakeholder engagement with government, have they been bearing fruits?
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much. For sure, there has been that lack of information, and dissemination of this information is very crucial. You find that some of those areas whereby somebody has that parcel of land, it is actually they are not the original owners. It is somebody who had prior information, and this prior information was not shared to the public or to the stakeholders. And the few people who had the information, they held the information, they went, purchased the land, they knew in 2-3 years this land is going to pass there. So you actually find that even the people who are benefiting are not the original owners of that parcel of land. It is somebody who came and bought at a throwaway price, but because they knew there was going to be a development, they hiked the price very high. So the dissemination of information to the stakeholders, to developers, it is high time we agree that we all need to grow as a country, and we need to get rid of these bad behaviors, because basically that is corruption. You have information which is not being shared by other people. We share the information, and if you had that information and you want to benefit out of the people who are ignorant, that should be discouraged, because that is encouraging corruption, and that is where we are going wrong as a country.
Okay. Mr. Kasuku, as we come to a close of this conversation, from where you sit, advising government on matters of infrastructure and such, we have seen the land question, the land acquisition is a thorny issue, not for just private developers, but also for governments. And we've seen government has now opted to take some of these projects to its own government land. Is this a strategy that government is going to be taking on for years to come, that we have these projects, not necessarily where we would have wanted them because of the land question, but because we can, this is our land? Is this something that we're going to be seeing more of in the future?
Definitely, the issue of land for infrastructure, or issue of land for government investments, is always something that is of great concern. Number one, the society has become speculative and transactional to an extent that that particular kind of behavior is actually affecting progress. And as such, what we therefore need to do as a society is to base our developments on appropriate planning. When we undertake proper planning of the investments that we need to undertake, then we end up making sure that if it is land that is required, then we set that land aside in readiness for that investment. If we need to expand a highway, we ought to have planned for it much earlier, so that we don't start moving people for us to expand a highway or for us to build a new highway. We ought to have paid for it much earlier. Like most of the infrastructure that you see today, particularly if you talk about the highway that comes from Mombasa going all the way to the borders, if you talk about the roads that you call bypasses in Nairobi, the railway leaves were actually acquired in the early 1970s, 71, 72 there. And having acquired them that much earlier has actually enabled us now to have the spaces we need for this investment. The only thing that has happened is that sometimes you find encroachers actually taking advantage of these spaces. When people see vacant land, even if it is for future infrastructure, they think it is vacant land, and then they start doing something on it.
But then they will argue that it was not branded as government land, so yes, everybody is looking somewhere.
That is now the equation that we need to resolve. We need actually to gazette all way leaves for infrastructure and all government development activities. They need to be gazetted, they need to be titled, and they need to have appropriate ownership or tenure documents, so that people do not come to make claims on them. So what I'm saying in short, we need to secure land much earlier using planning mechanisms, using planning strategies, using planning, development planning, policies, so that we don't come back to start even to buy government land that was already acquired, or land that was already earmarked is again being bought later on at a much higher cost. So we need to put planning way ahead of everything that we do.
Very well said. If you have been watching Good Morning Kenya, that conversation was about, infrastructural investments going forward. And are they priority, given that Wanjiku has been decrying the high cost of living and saying some of these mega projects that we are witnessing are not priority? The two gentlemen with me in studio has been Sylvester Kasuku, who is currently the infrastructure advisor of government and the immediate former CEO of the LAPSET project there. And join also with him or alongside him is Dr. George Mburu, who is the CEO of Mizizi Africa. And what they have said is that we need to keep the focus and that infrastructure is a backbone of not only the economy, but also just life as we know it. So if you have been asking that question about whether it is priority that we continue with is this infrastructural developments that you're seeing, well, it seems that they are not going anywhere, because we're not only making this inroads in as far as development is concerned for our current generation, but also for generations to come. I'm Regina Manyara. Keep watching KBC Channel 1. Good Morning Kenya.